What happens when the man you thought you could control serves you with divorce papers in front of your friends? How far can a woman go before her own lies trap her? Can you really blame your husband for leaving when all the evidence is on his side? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The morning light streaming through our kitchen window felt harsh against my skin as I poured coffee into my favorite mug, the one that read, "World's Best Mom," that Ella had given me last Mother's Day. My hands trembled slightly, not from the caffeine I desperately needed, but from the weight of Simon's stare boring into my back. "You were out late again last night," Simon said quietly, his voice carrying that familiar tone of disappointment that made my stomach clench with irritation rather than guilt. I turned to face my husband of 9 years, taking in his rumpled pajamas and the dark circles under his eyes. At 36, Simon Morland still looked like the software engineer I'd married. Methodical, predictable, safe. Too safe. "I told you it was a work event. The Morrison account is huge for us, and networking doesn't happen during business hours," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the defensiveness creeping in. "Some of us can't just sit behind a computer all day and call it networking." Simon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Lia, you've been to 4 work events this month, and when I called last night..." "When you called, I was in the middle of an important conversation with potential clients," I interrupted, the lie sliding off my tongue with practiced ease. "You know how it looks when someone's wife is checking up on them every 5 minutes? It's embarrassing, Simon." The truth was, I had been in an important conversation, just not the kind Simon would approve of. Derek Linwood had been telling me about his weekend plans, his hand resting casually on my knee under the table at Murphy's Bar, while my phone buzzed incessantly with Simon's calls. Each ignored call had felt like a small act of rebellion, a tiny declaration of independence from the suffocating routine that had become my marriage. "Mommy, are you mad again?" Ella's small voice cut through the tension as our 7-year-old daughter shuffled into the kitchen, her dark hair messy from sleep and her favorite unicorn pajamas wrinkled. The question hit me like a physical blow. Again, when had my anger become so constant that my daughter noticed it as a pattern? "No, sweetheart," I said, forcing brightness into my voice as I knelt down to smooth her hair. "Mommy and Daddy were just talking about work stuff. You know how boring grown-up jobs can be." Ella nodded solemnly, but her eyes darted between Simon and me with the intuitive wariness of a child who'd learned to read the emotional temperature of a room. "Can I have pancakes?" "Of course, baby," Simon said, already moving toward the pantry. "The Mickey Mouse ones." As Simon busied himself with breakfast, I caught my reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator. At 34, I still looked good. Better than good, actually. The yoga classes and careful attention to my appearance had paid off. My auburn hair caught the light perfectly, and the fitted blouse I'd worn to last night's work event still looked professional and attractive. Derek had certainly noticed. "You're wasted in suburbia, Lia," he'd whispered during one of our dances, his breath warm against my ear. "A woman like you should be living, not just existing." The memory sent a familiar thrill through me, quickly followed by annoyance as I watched Simon methodically measure pancake mix. Everything he did was so precise, so predictable. When was the last time he'd told me I was beautiful? When was the last time he'd made me feel alive instead of just married? The doorbell rang, interrupting my brooding thoughts. "That'll be Dad," Simon said, glancing at the clock. "He said he'd stop by before his doctor's appointment." Jack Morland entered the kitchen with his usual quiet dignity, his silver hair perfectly combed despite the early hour. At 63, Simon's father carried himself with the reserved strength of a man who'd raised 2 children alone after his wife's death 15 years ago. "Morning, Lia," he said politely, though his pale blue eyes, so similar to Simon's, held a coolness that hadn't been there in the early years of my marriage. Ella, there's my favorite granddaughter. I'm your only granddaughter, Grandpa Jack. Ella giggled, running to hug his legs. Details, Jack said with a rare smile, ruffling her hair before his gaze found Simon's. You look tired, son. The simple observation felt loaded with meaning, and I bristled at the implication. Simon's been working too hard, I said quickly. You know how he gets when he's stressed, imagining problems that aren't there. Jack's eyes flicked to me, and for a moment, I saw something that looked almost like pity. Not for Simon, for me. Sometimes the problems we ignore are the ones that hurt us most, he said quietly, accepting a cup of coffee from Simon. The words felt like a judgment, and my temper flared. Well, some of us believe in communication instead of silent martyrdom. If Simon has concerns, maybe he should express them like an adult instead of sulking. Lia, Simon's voice carried a warning I hadn't heard before. What? I'm just saying that marriage requires trust. Constant suspicion isn't healthy for anyone, especially Ella. Jack set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Trust goes both ways, Lia. It's earned and maintained through consistency and honesty. The kitchen fell silent except for the sizzle of pancakes on the griddle. Ella looked between the adults with growing confusion, and I felt a surge of resentment that they were putting her in this position. I need to get ready for work, I announced, turning on my heel and heading for the stairs. As I climbed to our bedroom, I heard Simon's voice, low and strained. Dad, I don't know what to do anymore. Document everything, son, came Jack's quiet reply, and protect Ella. The words sent a chill down my spine, but I pushed the feeling away. They were overreacting, making mountains out of molehills. So what if I'd been going out more lately? So what if I'd been enjoying the attention of an attractive, interesting man who made me feel alive again? I wasn't hurting anyone. I was just finally living. Chapter 2. Office Secrets. The open-plan office of Henderson Marketing buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy as I settled at my desk, grateful for the familiar chaos that would distract me from the morning's uncomfortable conversation. My computer screen flickered to life, immediately showing 17 new emails and 3 missed calls from the weekend. Someone's popular, Natalie Price observed, rolling her chair over from the adjacent desk. My best friend since college looked perfectly put together as always, her blonde hair swept into a professional chignon, and her makeup flawless, despite having 2 toddlers at home. Just work stuff, I said, though my heart skipped when I saw Derek's name in my text messages. You know how clients get on Fridays. Suddenly, everything's urgent on Monday. Natalie raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment as I quickly opened Derek's message. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about that dress you wore. Coffee later? I glanced around the office before typing back. Busy day, but maybe drinks after work? His response came immediately. Always worth the wait. That husband of yours is lucky, though he doesn't seem to appreciate what he has. The message sent a familiar thrill through me. Derek understood me in a way Simon never had. Where Simon saw my social needs as frivolous, Derek encouraged them. Where Simon worried about money and responsibilities, Derek talked about experiences and living life to the fullest. Earth to Lia, Natalie said, waving a hand in front of my face. You're grinning at your phone like a teenager. I quickly locked the screen. Just a funny meme from my mom. It wasn't entirely a lie. My mother, Marina Greer, had sent me a text that morning. Don't let Simon make you feel guilty for having a social life. Men hate when we're independent. Mom had never been Simon's biggest fan. She'd made it clear from our engagement that she thought I was settling, that I could do better than a quiet computer nerd who would never give me the excitement I deserved. Speaking of your mom, Natalie said, didn't she say something about you deserving more adventure? Maybe she's right. When's the last time you and Simon did something spontaneous? The question stung because I couldn't remember. Our date nights had become predictable dinner and a movie affairs, usually cut short by Ella's bedtime or Simon's early morning meetings. When was the last time he'd surprised me with anything? Simon's not really the spontaneous type, I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Maybe that's the problem, Natalie said gently. Have you talked to him about wanting more excitement in your relationship? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Simon. Can we talk tonight, after Ella goes to bed? The message filled me with dread. Simon's talks were usually lectures disguised as conversations, full of concerns and questions that made me feel like a teenager being interrogated by a parent. I showed Natalie the message. See what I mean? He can't just say, I love you, or have a good day. Everything has to be a serious discussion. Natalie frowned. Lia, maybe he's trying to connect with you. When's the last time you two really talked about your feelings? We talk all the time, I said defensively. Just because we don't have deep philosophical conversations about every little thing doesn't mean we don't communicate. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Tara, Simon's younger sister. Hey Lia, saw your Instagram posts from last night. Looked like fun. Simon seemed worried when I talked to him this morning. Everything okay? I stared at the message, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. I'd posted a few photos from Murphy's bar. Nothing inappropriate, just me with some colleagues having drinks. But Tara had always been protective of Simon, and her seemingly innocent question felt loaded with suspicion. What's wrong? Natalie asked, noticing my expression. Simon's sister is checking up on me through social media now, I said, showing her the message. This is exactly what I mean about feeling suffocated. I can't even post photos of a work event without getting the 3rd degree. Natalie read the message carefully. She seems concerned, not accusatory. Maybe she's just looking out for both of you. She's always taken Simon's side, I said, deleting Tara's message without responding. Ever since their mum died, she's been like his protective little guard dog. The comparison felt cruel even as I said it, but I was tired of feeling judged by Simon's family. Jack's cold politeness, Tara's pointed questions, they all acted like I was the problem in my marriage, like Simon was some perfect husband who deserved better. My computer chimed with a new email from Derek. Lunch meeting cancelled. Free for that coffee after all. There's something I want to discuss about the Henderson account. I glanced around the office. Derek's event planning company had been courting Henderson marketing for months, and he'd specifically requested to work with me on any potential collaboration. It was perfectly legitimate business. I'm going to grab coffee with a potential client, I told Natalie, gathering my purse. Derek Linwood from Linwood Events. He's interested in partnering on the Morrison account. The cute guy from the networking mixer? Natalie asked with a knowing look. Lia, be careful. You're married, and office gossip travels fast. It's business, Nat. Not everything is about romance, I said, though my pulse quickened at the thought of seeing Derek again. Some of us actually care about advancing our careers. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, and Natalie's expression shifted from concern to hurt. I'm just looking out for you, she said quietly. You've been different lately, distracted, defensive. I'm worried about you. There's nothing to worry about, I insisted. I'm finally feeling like myself again instead of just Simon's wife and Ella's mother. Is that such a terrible thing? Natalie didn't answer, but her silence spoke volumes as I headed for the elevator. The coffee shop Derek had suggested was intimate and dimly lit, the kind of place where conversations felt private even in a crowd. He was already waiting in a corner booth, his dark hair perfectly styled, and his smile warm and inviting. You look incredible, he said as I approached, standing to pull out my chair like a gentleman. That color brings out your eyes. The compliment sent warmth through me. When was the last time Simon had noticed what I was wearing, much less complimented it? Thank you, I said, settling into the booth. You mentioned the Henderson account? Derek's smile widened. Always business first with you. It's one of the things I admire most about you, Lia. You're ambitious, driven, qualities that should be celebrated, not stifled. The words felt like validation after years of Simon's subtle disapproval of my career ambitions. Derek understood that I wanted more than just domestic contentment. Simon thinks I work too much, I found myself saying. He's always making comments about my schedule, my networking events. Sometimes I feel like he wants me to be this perfect suburban housewife who's content to stay home and bake cookies. You're too dynamic for that, Derek said, leaning forward slightly. A woman like you needs stimulation, challenge, excitement. It's not fair for anyone to try to dim your light. His words echoed my mother's advice, and I felt a surge of gratitude for finally having someone who understood me. Exactly, I said. I love Ella, and I care about Simon, but I'm not just a wife and mother. I'm a person with my own dreams and needs. Derek reached across the table and briefly touched my hand. Never apologize for knowing your worth, Lia. Life's too short to settle for less than you deserve. The touch sent electricity through me, and I didn't pull away as quickly as I should have. My phone buzzed with another text from Simon. Hope you're having a good day. Love you. The simple message should have made me smile, but instead it felt like an intrusion. Here I was, finally feeling appreciated and understood, and Simon's text felt like a leash tugging me back to reality. I turned my phone face down on the table. Everything okay? Derek asked. Just work stuff, I said, the lie coming easier this time. Nothing that can't wait. The Morrison account celebration was supposed to be a simple dinner with clients, but by 9 p.m., our group had migrated to Murphy's Bar for what Derek called the real networking. The dimly lit venue pulsed with energy, filled with the kind of creative professionals who understood that business relationships were built on personal connections. I felt alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. My black dress, the one I'd bought on impulse and hidden from Simon because of the price, fit perfectly, and the appreciative glances from around the room reminded me that I was still attractive, still desirable. Derek appeared at my elbow with a fresh drink, his hand settling naturally on the small of my back as he leaned in to speak over the music. You're the most beautiful woman in this room, he said, his breath warm against my ear. I hope you know that. The compliment sent heat through me, especially when I noticed how other women were looking at Derek with obvious interest. He could have his pick of anyone here, but he was choosing to spend his time with me. My phone buzzed against the bar, and I glanced down to see Simon's name on the screen. The third call in 20 minutes. Popular tonight, Derek observed, his tone carrying just a hint of disapproval. My husband, I said, declining the call and placing the phone face down. He worries when I'm out late. Worries or controls? Derek asked, signaling the bartender for another round. There's a difference, you know. The question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Simon's calls did feel controlling, like he didn't trust me to handle myself in professional situations. Did he think I was incompetent? Or worse, did he think I couldn't be trusted? He just doesn't understand the business world, I said, accepting the fresh drink. Software engineers don't network the same way we do. Everything's very structured, very predictable in his field. Must be suffocating, Derek said sympathetically. Being with someone who doesn't appreciate your ambition, your need for intellectual stimulation. The phone buzzed again. Simon's name flashed on the screen, followed immediately by a text. Lia, please call me back. I'm worried. It's almost 10 p.m. I showed the message to Derek, who shook his head with obvious disapproval. 10 p.m., he said. You're a grown woman, not a teenager with a curfew. This is exactly the kind of controlling behavior that kills relationships. His words echoed my own thoughts, and I felt justified in my growing irritation. I was 34 years old, a successful account manager, and perfectly capable of managing my own schedule. Simon's constant checking up felt insulting. You're right, I said, turning the phone completely off. I'm here for work, and I shouldn't have to explain every minute of my evening to anyone. Derek's smile was approving. That's the spirit. You deserve to be with someone who celebrates your independence, not someone who tries to clip your wings. The music shifted to something slower, and Derek extended his hand. Dance with me? I hesitated for just a moment, aware that we were crossing a line from professional networking to something more personal. But the alcohol, the music, and Derek's obvious admiration made the decision easy. Why not? I said, taking his hand. On the small dance floor, Derek pulled me closer than strictly appropriate for colleagues, but I didn't resist. His cologne was expensive and masculine, nothing like Simon's practical deodorant and aftershave. When Derek's hand settled on my lower back, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced since college. You're wasted in suburbia, he murmured as we swayed to the music. A woman like you should be living in the city, attending gallery openings, traveling for business. You should be with someone who matches your energy. The fantasy he painted was seductive. I imagined myself in a downtown loft, wearing designer clothes to important meetings, being courted by successful, sophisticated men who appreciated my intelligence and ambition. It's not that simple, I said, though my protest sounded weak even to me. I have a daughter, responsibilities. The best mothers are the ones who show their children how to live fully, Derek said. What kind of example are you setting by staying in a marriage that doesn't fulfill you? The question stung because it touched on my deepest fears about Ella. Was I teaching her to settle for less than she deserved? Was I modeling a kind of quiet desperation disguised as domestic contentment? When I got home after midnight, Simon was waiting in the living room, still dressed in his work clothes. His face was drawn with worry and something else I couldn't quite identify. I was worried sick, he said, standing as I entered. You weren't answering your phone, and when I called the restaurant, they said your party had left hours ago. You called the restaurant? I asked, incredulous. Simon, that's incredibly embarrassing. What if clients heard that my husband was checking up on me, like I'm some kind of child? I was worried something had happened to you, Simon said, his voice strained. It's after midnight, Lia. You've never stayed out this late without calling. I'm a grown woman, I said, echoing Derek's words. I don't need to check in every hour like a teenager. This is exactly the kind of controlling behavior that's suffocating our marriage. Simon's face went pale. Controlling? Lia, I was worried about your safety. That's not control, that's love. Is it? I challenged, fueled by alcohol and Derek's validation. Or is it insecurity? Are you so threatened by my success that you need to monitor my every move? That's not fair, Simon said quietly. I've always supported your career. I've never asked you to give up anything for this marriage. Haven't you? I shot back. Every time I have a networking event, you make comments. Every time I work late, you act like I'm abandoning the family. You want me to be content with your boring, predictable life, but some of us want more than that. The words hung in the air between us, cruel and sharp. Simon looked like I'd slapped him, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. But then I remembered Derek's words about not apologizing for knowing my worth. I'm going to bed, I announced, and tomorrow we need to have a serious conversation about boundaries and trust in this marriage. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Simon sink back into his chair with a heavy sigh. Part of me wanted to turn back, to apologize, to explain that I was just frustrated and overwhelmed. But a larger part of me felt vindicated, finally having expressed the resentment that had been building for months. I was done being the perfect suburban wife. It was time to start living for myself. I woke to the sound of Ella's laughter drifting up from the kitchen, followed by the familiar clatter of breakfast preparation. My head pounded from too much wine and too little sleep, but more than that, I felt the weight of last night's confrontation pressing down on me like a physical thing. The clock read 8:47 a.m. I'd overslept, which meant Simon had handled the morning routine alone. Again. The guilt that thought should have inspired was quickly replaced by irritation. Why did everything always fall on me? Why couldn't Simon handle one morning without making it feel like a huge sacrifice? I showered quickly and dressed in my most professional outfit. A sharp navy blazer and matching skirt that made me feel powerful and in control. If Simon wanted to continue last night's conversation, I needed to look like someone who wouldn't be intimidated or made to feel guilty for having a social life. Downstairs, I found Simon at the kitchen table with Ella, helping her with what looked like a school project. Jack sat across from them, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, as he watched his granddaughter colour a poster about butterflies. "Morning," I said brightly, moving toward the coffee maker with deliberate casualness. "Sorry I'm running late. Long night of networking, you know how it is." The silence that followed my words was deafening. Ella looked up from her colouring with the innocent curiosity of a 7-year-old who sensed undercurrents she couldn't understand. "Daddy made pancakes again," she announced. "The Mickey Mouse ones. He said you were tired from work." "That's right, sweetheart," I said, shooting Simon a look that I hoped conveyed gratitude for not involving our daughter in adult problems. "Mommy had a very important work meeting last night." Jack's pale blue eyes met mine over his coffee cup, and I saw something there that made my stomach clench. Not anger, exactly, but a kind of disappointed recognition that felt worse than outright hostility. "Important meeting until after midnight?" he asked quietly. The question felt like an accusation, and my defenses immediately went up. "The business world doesn't operate on suburban schedules, Jack. Sometimes networking requires staying out past bedtime." "Of course," Jack said mildly, but his tone suggested he didn't believe a word of it. Simon cleared his throat. "Ella, why don't you go get your backpack ready for school? Grandpa Jack and I will be up to help you in a minute." Our daughter nodded and skipped out of the kitchen, leaving the 3 adults in tense silence. I poured my coffee with exaggerated calm, determined not to let them make me feel like I'd done something wrong. "Lia," Simon began carefully, "about last night." "What about it?" I interrupted, turning to face him with my coffee mug held like a shield. "I told you it was a work function. The Morrison account is huge for Henderson marketing, and maintaining client relationships requires more than just office meetings." "Until midnight," Jack repeated, his voice carrying the same quiet skepticism that had always irritated me. "Yes, until midnight," I snapped. "Some of us understand that success requires sacrifice. Not everyone gets to work 9 to 5 and call it a career." The words were designed to hurt, and I saw them hit their mark in Simon's slight flinch. But instead of backing down, he straightened in his chair with a resolve I hadn't seen before. "I called the restaurant," Simon said quietly. "Henderson Marketing's dinner ended at 8:30. The hostess remembered your group leaving together." My coffee mug suddenly felt heavy in my hands. "So? We went somewhere else afterward. That's what networking is, Simon. Building relationships beyond formal business settings." "With Derek Linwood?" Simon asked, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Not jealousy exactly, but a kind of tired certainty that made my blood run cold. "Derek was there, yes," I said, working to keep my voice steady, "along with several other potential clients and colleagues. It's called networking, Simon. Maybe if you ever left your computer, you'd understand how business relationships actually work." Jack set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Lia, we're not trying to attack you. We're concerned about—" "About what?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "About me having a career. About me being good at my job. About me having friends and colleagues who actually appreciate my talents. About our marriage," Simon said quietly. "About our family. About the fact that you seem to resent everything about the life we've built together." The accusation stung because it was partially true. I did resent aspects of our life, the predictability, the financial constraints, the way Simon's cautious nature seemed to limit every possibility for adventure or growth. "I resent being treated like a child," I shot back. "I resent having to justify every professional decision to someone who doesn't understand my industry. I resent being made to feel guilty for wanting more than just domestic contentment." "More than your family?" Jack asked, and his voice was so quiet I almost missed the question. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's not what I said. Isn't it? Simon asked, standing slowly. Because lately, it feels like Ella and I are just obstacles to the life you really want. That's ridiculous, I protested, but even as I said it, I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice. I love Ella. I love our family. I just want to be successful, to contribute something meaningful beyond carpools and PTA meetings. No one's asking you to give up your career, Simon said, but success doesn't require staying out until midnight without calling home. Success doesn't require making your husband feel like a controlling monster for worrying about your safety. I opened my mouth to argue, but Ella's voice calling from upstairs interrupted whatever harsh words I'd been about to say. Daddy, I can't find my library book. Simon looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. We'll finish this conversation later, he said finally, then headed upstairs to help our daughter. Jack remained seated at the table, studying me with those pale eyes that seemed to see too much. He loves you, you know, he said quietly. More than you deserve, if I'm being honest. The words were like a slap. Excuse me. My son is a good man, Jack continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. He's faithful, hard-working, devoted to his family. He deserves a wife who appreciates those qualities instead of resenting them. I do appreciate. Do you? Jack interrupted, standing slowly. Because from where I sit, it looks like you're looking for reasons to justify behavior you know is wrong. With that, he walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my coffee and the uncomfortable weight of his words. I tried to shake off the conversation as I gathered my things for work, but Jack's accusation echoed in my mind. Was I looking for justification? Was I trying to make Simon into a villain to excuse my own actions? No, I decided firmly. I was simply refusing to apologize for having ambition, for wanting intellectual stimulation, for expecting my husband to trust and support me instead of questioning my every move. Derek understood that. Derek appreciated my drive and independence. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek himself. Hope you survived the Inquisition at home. Coffee later? I have some ideas about the Henderson collaboration that I think you'll love. I typed back quickly. Definitely. Need some sanity after this morning. His response was immediate. Poor Lia. You deserve so much better than suburban judgment. See you at 2. Perfect, I replied, feeling my mood lift for the first time all morning. As I headed out to my car, I caught sight of Simon watching me from Ella's bedroom window. Our eyes met for just a moment, and I saw something there that made my chest tighten with an emotion I didn't want to examine too closely. But I had work to do, a career to build, and a life to live. Simon would just have to learn to trust me, or we'd have bigger problems than late-night networking events. I was done apologizing for being successful. The family group chat that had once been filled with birthday reminders and funny photos of Ella had become a battlefield. It started innocuously enough, Tara sharing a screenshot of my Instagram post from Murphy's bar with the caption, Lia looks like she's having fun. Wish I could join these work events. But I knew Simon's sister well enough to recognize the passive-aggressive undertone. She wasn't celebrating my social life, she was documenting it. I was in my office, trying to focus on quarterly reports, when my phone exploded with notifications. The group chat, which included Simon, Tara, Jack, and me, had suddenly become very active. Tara, just wondering about the timeline here. This post is timestamped at 11:47 p.m., but the location shows Murphy's bar, not the Morrison account dinner venue. Me, not sure why you're tracking my social media posts, but yes, we went to Murphy's after dinner. It's called networking. Jack, until almost midnight on a Tuesday. Me, some of us have careers that require more than 9 to 5 commitment. I immediately regretted the defensive tone, but Tara's response came before I could send anything else. Tara, no judgment on your career, Lia. Just concerned because Simon mentioned you weren't answering his calls. We were worried something had happened. The we stung. It was clear that Simon had been discussing our marriage with his family. painting me as the unreasonable wife who stayed out too late and ignored her husband's calls. Me. I was in a professional setting. Constantly answering personal calls looks unprofessional. Simon, can we please not do this in the family chat? Tara, you're right, Simon, but I'm just going to say this once. Marriage is a partnership. Partners communicate. Me. Exactly. Partners trust each other. They don't interrogate each other like suspects. I was typing furiously now, my anger building with each exchange. How dare they gang up on me like this? How dare they make me feel like the villain for having a social life? Jack, trust is earned, Lia, and maintained through consistent, honest behavior. Me, are you implying I'm dishonest? Tara, no one's implying anything. We're just concerned about the pattern here. Me, what pattern? Tara, the late nights, the defensive responses, the way you talk about Simon like he's some kind of burden instead of your husband. The accusation hit too close to home, and I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment. I could picture them all, Simon, Tara, and Jack, sitting around discussing my behavior, analyzing my choices, deciding collectively that I was the problem in my marriage. Me. I don't have to justify my career or my social life to anyone. If Simon has issues with my schedule, that's between us. Simon, Lia, please, let's talk about this at home. Me, there's nothing to talk about. I work hard, I network professionally, and I refuse to apologize for being successful. Tara, success doesn't require lying about where you are or who you're with. The message felt like a slap. Me, I have never lied about anything. Tara, really? Because I saw Derek Linwood's Instagram story from last night. You two looked pretty cozy for a professional networking event. My blood ran cold. Derek had posted something? I quickly switched to Instagram and found his story from the previous night, a short video of the dance floor at Murphy's bar. In the background, barely visible but unmistakably recognizable, Derek and I were dancing closer than any married woman should be dancing with a man who wasn't her husband. Me. I danced with a colleague at a networking event. That's not a crime. Tara. No, but it's not exactly appropriate either, especially when your husband is at home worried sick about where you are. Jack. Lia, we're not trying to attack you. We're trying to understand what's happening to our family. Me. What's happening is that I'm being treated like a child instead of a grown woman with her own career and social life. If you can't handle that, maybe the problem isn't with me. The chat went quiet for several minutes, and I felt a mixture of vindication and anxiety. Had I gone too far? But no, they were the ones who'd started this confrontation, not me. Finally, Simon's message appeared. Simon. I'm going to stay at Dad's tonight. Ella can come with me if she wants. The words hit me like a physical blow. He was leaving, taking our daughter. Me. That's completely unnecessary. You're being dramatic. Simon. I need some space to think, and Ella doesn't need to be around this tension. Tara. Good idea, Simon. You and Ella are always welcome here too. Jack. My door is always open, son. I stared at the messages, realizing that the battle lines had been drawn and I was standing alone on one side. Simon's entire family had closed ranks against me, treating me like the villain in my own marriage. Me. Fine. Run to Daddy when your wife has a successful career. Very mature. Simon. This isn't about your career, Lia. It's about respect, honesty, and commitment, things that seem to matter less to you than they used to. Me. Don't lecture me about commitment when you're the one walking out. Simon. I'm not walking out. I'm creating space for both of us to figure out what we really want. Tara. Maybe that's exactly what you both need. I threw my phone down on my desk, fury and hurt warring in my chest. How had this happened? How had I become the bad guy for wanting more than domestic mediocrity? My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Lunch? You sound like you could use a friendly ear. For a moment, I hesitated. Meeting Derek right now, when emotions were running high, and my marriage was in crisis, felt dangerous. But then I thought about Simon packing bags, about his family's collective judgment, about being made to feel guilty for having ambition and social needs. Yes, I typed back, I definitely need a friend right now. Derek's response was immediate. Poor Lia. They don't deserve you. See you in 20. As I gathered my purse and headed for the elevator, I caught sight of Natalie watching me with concern. Everything okay? She asked. Just family drama, I said, forcing a smile. Nothing I can't handle. But as the elevator doors closed, I wondered if that was really true. For the first time since this whole situation had started, I felt truly alone, and I wasn't sure if that was liberation or the beginning of losing everything that mattered. 3 weeks later, I sat in the sterile conference room of Morrison, Blake & Associates, staring at documents that would change my life forever. The law office smelled like leather and disappointment, and the morning light streaming through the tall windows felt harsh and unforgiving. Simon sat across from me, flanked by his attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Morrison, who looked like she'd never lost a case. Beside Simon sat Tara and Jack, their faces grave but resolute. The united front they presented made my chest tight with a mixture of anger and something that might have been regret. My own lawyer, hastily hired just 2 days ago when the divorce papers arrived, shuffled through his notes with the nervous energy of a man who knew he was outgunned. Mrs. Morland, Rebecca Morrison began, her voice professionally neutral, my client has prepared a comprehensive documentation of the deterioration of your marriage, including evidence of infidelity and abandonment of parental responsibilities. Infidelity? I sputtered, my voice higher than I'd intended. That's completely false. Rebecca slid a manila folder across the polished conference table. Phone records showing 247 calls and texts to Derek Linwood over the past 3 months. Bank statements showing charges at hotels during supposed work events. Credit card receipts from restaurants and bars during times when you told your husband you were working late. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Page after page of evidence, meticulously organized and highlighted. Call logs showing conversations with Derek that lasted hours. Hotel charges I'd forgotten about. Times when Derek and I had gotten rooms to continue business discussions that had nothing to do with business. This proves nothing, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Business relationships require overnight hotel stays, Rebecca interrupted smoothly. 3-hour phone conversations at midnight, dancing inappropriately at bars while ignoring your husband's worried calls. She slid another document across the table, a printed screenshot from Derek's Instagram story, the one Tara had mentioned in our family chat. In the dim lighting of Murphy's bar, Derek and I were clearly visible, his hands on my waist, my face tilted up toward his with obvious intimacy. This was taken the night you told your husband you were at a professional networking event, Rebecca continued. The timestamp shows 11:43 p.m. Your husband's phone record shows 17 unanswered calls between 9 p.m. and midnight that evening. The conference room door clicked shut behind Simon like the lid of a coffin. I sat there, pen still in my hand, staring at the wet ink of my own signature on the custody papers, full legal and physical to him. Me, 2 Saturdays a month in a county visitation room with a social worker watching me read picture books to my own daughter. Rebecca gathered her folders. We'll file this afternoon. A process server will deliver your copy by 5. My lawyer, some exhausted public defender type I'd found on Yelp, mumbled something about reasonable grounds for appeal and slipped out, eager to escape the radiation of my humiliation. I stayed in the chair until the cleaning crew arrived. When I finally walked to the parking garage, my phone buzzed. Derek, hey, heard things got messy. Maybe we pump the brakes for a bit. Don't want drama. I stared at those words until the screen went black. 3 months later, I live in a beige apartment that smells like someone else's curry. My weekends with Ella are 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., in a room with plastic chairs and a two-way mirror. She calls the social worker Miss Amy and asks if Daddy is coming soon. Simon kept the house, the dog, the friends, the life we built. He's dating a pediatric nurse who bakes banana bread and never misses a school play. Derek blocked me the day the decree went final. I got the freedom I thought I was dying for. Turns out it's just a quieter kind of dying. Some nights I drive past our old house. The porch light is on. Ella's new swing set glows under the floodlight. There's laughter inside, clear, uncomplicated, the kind I taught her was boring. I sit in my car until the light goes off, then drive back to my apartment and sleep in the middle of a bed that still feels too big. Simon didn't destroy our family. He just stopped letting me do it for him. And the silence, where his forgiveness used to live, is the loudest sound I've ever heard.